On a certain Sabbath, Jesus went into the synagogue and taught, and there was a man there whose right hand was withered. The scribes and the Pharisees watched him closely to see if he would cure on the Sabbath, so that they might have discovered a reason to accuse him. But he realized their intentions and said to the man with the withered hand, "Come up and stand before us." And he rose and stood there. Then Jesus said to them, "I ask you, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath rather than to do evil, to save life rather than to destroy it?" Looking around at them all, he then said to him, "Stretch out your hand." He did so, and his hand was restored. But they became enraged and discussed together what they might do to Jesus. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. Today the Church celebrates the liturgical memorial of Saint Teresa of Calcutta, Mother Teresa. In the memory of many of us is her wrinkled face. There is the example of a life dedicated to the poorest of the poor, the only known, and as far as I know, the only consecrated man or woman who has received the Nobel Peace Prize. A person, an extraordinary woman, but at the time, what made Mother Teresa special? What linked the union, for example, with Saint John Paul II? Because the saints, to understand them, you have to put them in context, the same as the readings, the text in context. Mother Teresa of Calcutta was a nun. She was born in Albania, was a nun in a religious congregation dedicated to teaching, and had been assigned by her superiors to work in a school in Calcutta. She was doing well. She was a very good nun. But the Lord asked something else of her. The Lord called her to start from scratch, risking her life and her honor, picking up the dying from the streets of Calcutta, those dying who had no one and who were being pecked alive by crows and eaten alive by rats. She began by taking the first one she found to an abandoned Hindu temple, the temple of the goddess Kali, a temple of a goddess dedicated to vengeance. Well, she picked up the first one, and then with the help of some of her former students, she started little by little, and after all that work, the missionaries of charity emerged. But what was so special about this nun? Besides her dedication to the last ones, what was it about her that attracted attention? It was not her original habit with the typical clothing of an Indian woman, the sari. It was not that. It was original about her. What was striking was that all these charitable services was accompanied by intense prayer. 2 hours of prayer, 2 hours a day, in addition, of course, to the Holy Mass, 2 hours of prayer every day. That is what was striking, because at that time, in that context, the Church was facing one more of the many perfidious heresies that it has had to endure and overcome throughout history. This heresy said that it was necessary to choose between a life of prayer or a commitment to charity, and that the important thing was charity, that prayer was useless. It was a time of ridicule of nuns, cloistered nuns. How many times have we heard of people who never went to Mass but who pretended to decide on the future of the Church? To affirm, I do not know what they are good for, what the cloistered nuns are good for. Even the nuns who work in schools or in hospitals, it is as if I were to decide what the Communist Party is for. I am not a communist, and God willing, I will not be one in my life. Therefore, I don't have much to say about how it has to be organized. If it were to disappear, I would be very happy. Well, that is what happens to us, that there are many people outside the Church who try to tell us how we have to be. Mother Teresa of Calcutta, with her humility, her simplicity, her face full of wrinkles, and her gaze full of love, went against that apparently charitable secularist current that today we know as liberation theology. One must be at the side of the poor and one must kneel before the tabernacle. That is what made her special. You cannot separate charity from the spiritual life. If you want to have true charity and endure in such a demanding work, much more than all the liberation theologians who generally have been library masters have done in their whole life, well, she really, at the side of the lost ones, risking her life because she could contract diseases or could be attacked, she prayed and worked, prayed and served. There is one anecdote that exemplifies very well what I am saying. On one occasion, the superior of one of her convents in an African country was with the community overwhelmed by the work they had to do. The poor were so many that the nuns could not cope and wrote to Mother Teresa. "Mother," she said, "we have too much work. We cannot serve well all these poor. Please, Mother, allow us, instead of 2 hours of prayer, let us do only 1 hour of prayer," which for the vast majority of religious is something that they do not even remotely observe. Allow us, she asked that Mother Superior, that instead of 2 hours, let us do 1 hour. Mother Teresa's response was withering. Instead of 2 hours, you do 3, because the harder the work, the more we need strength, the more we need motivation to resist and to continue doing this exhausting work, and those motivations, those forces are found in prayer. For 2 years, I went to work at night, obviously not very late at night, but often in the center of one of those centers that have the nuns of Mother Teresa in Madrid, one that have been near the old soccer stadium of Atletico. In that center, in addition to other services, they took in dying AIDS patients. It was a frightening experience, and I was only there some nights with a certain frequency, but some nights I did not spend the day there as they did. In the center of that place was a chapel, the chapel accessible also to the dying. In the chapel was the tabernacle, and next to the tabernacle was this phrase, "I thirst." The phrase of Jesus on the cross, "I thirst." What was Jesus thirsting for? Jesus was thirsting for affection, for attention, for medical care, the few that could be given to them because of their situation, those dying of AIDS, which was a terrible thing to see them suffer, and how they died. It was terrible. But he also thirsted for companionship in the tabernacle. This was Mother Teresa's secret, to pray before Jesus in the tabernacle and to kneel before Jesus in the poor. All those who want to separate spirituality from charity on the one hand, and today, unfortunately, more on the side of secularism and activism than on the side of an old-fashioned spiritualism, all those who want to separate spirituality from charity are not Catholics. We have always been on our knees before the tabernacle and on our knees before the poor. Even the cloistered nuns, who are the great benefactors of the church, are on their knees before the tabernacle, and that makes them the engine that sustains those of us who are on our knees before the poor. Mother Teresa has taught us that without roots there cannot be fruits, and that certainly the roots, in order to be useful, must give rise to fruits. We entrust ourselves to her so that we do not lack the strength of prayer and the example of charity. Amen.